Hey everybody, welcome to the Jess and John pod. Oh,
Who are
I'm
you?
Jess. I forgot to
Yeah, you are.
tell the people I'm Jess.
And I'm John. Nice to see you, JJ Nash.
We're
Second week of being locked in.
already messing stuff up in our first godless podcast.
That is right. Our podcast has effectively killed God. God is no longer with us. By God, we mean our producer, Gabby Schulte, but also, the more traditional God-like being.
Yeah, we're unsupervised this episode, so you're in for a treat, really, is what we're trying to say.
It's going to be wild.
Let's get into it. Donald Trump's tariffs. Again, we're talking about the same thing because he did what he did the last time. He's backed out of what he's implemented. He's keeping the tariffs on China. They went up to 104. We saw retaliatory tariffs from China. He's clarified that now there are 145% tariffs on Chinese imports to the United States. That's the latest figure I've
Is
seen.
is that the dude? I don't even know. I mean, you all have watched how our country is being run. Literally, we made a show outline, and everything has changed about it in the last 12 hours. You just said, what are they? 145
On China, yep.
in the show outline, which was made yesterday. We have 104%, and then I was like, oh yeah, today it's 125%, and now it is
145. And
cool.
the 10% baseline's still there, which is ridiculous.
That's great. You don't want to be running a country without that in place.
But he took away all the weird made up math ones, like 90% on Vietnam. That is what is now lifted, is the quote unquote reciprocal tariffs, which are not reciprocal tariffs, but we already got into that.
Chat GPT detritus.
Yeah, I think so originally when Donald Trump was on the campaign trail and he said first day in office, we're doing tariffs on Canada, Mexico, China. Then he went back and forth for the past few months. Now, this was right after his State of the Union. I said I think his plan here is it's some kind of insider trading. I said it on the podcast too, but I'm not accusing them of insider trading because they wouldn't do something illegal. It is
Yeah.
very possible that that's what this is, crashing the market on purpose so people can buy when it's low, and then they're gonna make a bunch of money when it bumps back up, and he says, "Actually, I'm calling these tariffs off." Now, there's a clip that we're gonna have our producer put in right now that is in the Oval Office today where he's talking about how much his buddies made off of this week's stock market decline, and then announcement that the tariffs are called off and the stock market bounced back up. A bunch of people made a ton of money. The market went up over 12% in one day.
Yeah, that which, to be clear, is insane. I mean, like a percentage point of movement is like a thing of newsworthiness. And this is how many percent did you say?
When I saw it, when I checked it was 12% in one day in the S&P 500.
Absolutely crazy. And of course, in the clip, just in, I assume, the Oval Office, it's the White House, whatever it is, he's surrounded by, billionaires, even the ones that Charles Schwab, who he makes a point of pointing out is not only an investment firm, but an actual person standing there with Donald Trump, who has a whole bunch of money. And they're just like, hey, Chuck, how much money did you make? 900 billion off of this garbage? Oh, nice. That must be great. And they're just standing there, in the executive branch talking about how much money they made off of this hijacking of the stock market. I mean, big picture here. Somebody said it on the internet. It always resonated with me that the stock market is just like a graph of rich people's feelings. And this is true. It's like the richest 10% of people own 93% of stock value. So really, but then, here they are just standing in the office of our government, that we're supposed to run, talking about how much they made off of this manipulation. It's crazy.
Yeah, we're going to get into the stock market. We have a really good interview with Barry Ritholtz, who is the chief investment officer of Ritholtz Wealth Management. He also writes The Big Picture. He just wrote a book, How Not to Invest. And he does a good job explaining why the tariff announcements translate into response in the stock market, what it all means. What are stocks? What does it mean when they go up and down? He got really into the basics. He criticized the global capitalist system. He criticized Donald Trump. He gave us some good perspective, so you're in for a treat at the end. But I mean, there's potentially a larger, more nefarious plot than just a little bit of buying the dip going on here among rich guys. I had this sort of Jimmy Neutron brain blast moment when I was on the Insurgents podcast chatting to Rob and Jordan Uhl about these tariffs and this theory that, what's the deal if Peter Thiel, this tech billionaire, is so close to Donald Trump and is kind of calling the shots? What is his play here? Like, why would he be supportive of this kind of tariff? And the idea I had is they don't wanna bring manufacturing to the US because they wanna be good stewards of the working class economy and give people jobs that they desperately want in some kind of reindustrialization period. No, because in 5 to 10 years, think about how automated most manufacturing will be. It's gonna be a lot of AI-powered robots, and a lot of people don't make this distinction, but, like, computing power and AI is is truly, like, the software. Robots are really about mechanical machines that can, like, physically do stuff, and they're different in that way, but, like, AI can power a robot and make it do like precise motions that right now only humans can do. So,
Like the worm.
yeah, a lot of the billionaires in America have invested a ton of money in robots already, by the way, Peter Thiel included. Now, they don't want manufacturing to come to the United States so they can pay people to do manufacturing. They want not only tariffs so manufacturing comes home, but interest rates to be low because they're going to take out bank loans and they want those to come cheap, so they want interest rates to be down, and then they're gonna take their bank loans that they make off of what they leverage the stock that they have and say, "Look, this is my financial backing, give me a bunch of money so I can turn it into a bunch more money." They're gonna build factories, they're gonna furnish them with robots, they won't have to pay wages, they'll have to pay people to maintain the robots, and they'll pay energy costs, but at the end of the day, that's a hugely profitable, low input cost enterprise when you're not paying for the labor to make the garments and all the tchotchkes that we buy. And so it's very possible that that's their like evil long game and why they're down with Trump's plan here. And I turned it
Yeah.
into a Ben and Gesserit Dune skit, which was fun.
Yeah, the Dune skit, that was if you haven't seen Jessica's Dune skit, there's a couple of them out there. They're blowing up the internet. As Paul Wall would say, Jessica's got the internet going nuts with Dune skits. So check it out. It's a really relatable way to kind of get a hold on the big picture that these billionaires want. And you know, who would have guessed that the vision of the future that these people have for all of us is just kind of um, human jobs being, lubing up robots that are making tchotchkes for us and returning just trillions of dollars to whoever owns these things that are headquartered in America. This is the onshoring that they're trying to bring back for us. Um, but what else would you expect? I mean, these are people who stand in the White House and talk about how many billions they made off of uh, fucking with the global economy and all of our futures. I wouldn't put
Yeah.
it past them at all.
Yeah, and that video, it's crazy because now it's got, like, something like 4,000 comments, right? And I see the MAGA comments. Oh, it definitely got posted in some fucking Reddit, and they're like, "Oh, this girl's stupid," right? "Study economics, get an education, then talk to me," which is awesome. They're like, "Oh, this bimbo wants to say anything," which is really satisfying to me because I did get an education, so the idea that they think I'm getting by on my looks is, like, a huge compliment, and it means so much to me every time I see it that, like, I could do without the education that I work so hard for. It's kinda nice to know I have something to fall back on. But anyway, they're all commenting like, "Oh, so you want slave labor in China?" Their number one issue right now. They're so passionate about the issue of child labor and slave labor overseas. I didn't know they cared so much about this. So many comments, John. It's insane.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, of course, but Jessica, I think you might be the only person with an economics degree that I actually trust. This because again with these tariff things, being from where I am from, the Ohio Valley, I've talked about this on the podcast before, but you know, the last time these people were talking about getting rid of tariffs, it was like um economists, the business elite, former presidents, all these people, they're saying we got to get rid of tariffs, we got to go with free trade, and it's going to raise the standards for everybody across the board. It's a win-win, a no-brainer. And if you don't support that, you're just this, knuckle dragging Luddite, right? So that history, because that's what people were told in the manufacturing areas of this country. And then, they went along with it. Everything blew up here. And um it's like a moment that I feel like we can't forget, that's complicated by the fact that the people pushing it now get to kind of monopolize that I told you so moment, and kind of use it as smoke and mirrors to say, hey, we're going to be bringing back uh, good paying jobs just like the good old days, and the way we're going to do it is these tariffs. And lost in that is the legitimate grievance that people should have in these places. The last time free traders came through here and were like, hey, we got a bridge to sell you. But I think, you know there's just been so much so much news, so much change on this in the last couple of days. I can feel a rant coming on here, and I hope that's okay right now.
Get into it.
Okay. You know, uh, the stated goal here is to bring back the good old days, to bring back the good paying jobs, right? But the reality that we're seeing, especially with Trump and all his billionaire buddies standing in the White House talking about how much money they made off of the stock market going absolutely insane, is that, what are the outcomes? Regular people are going to get hit directly in the wallet by this tariff policy. But I think the bigger thing is that this is the outcome of this is that all of this instability is just an opportunity for the big fish out there to assert even more control and consolidate even more power than they already have. Because that's what happens. It's like in anything, right? Um, when instability hits, the big fish are able to survive the waves, but they crash over all of the little small players and they wipe them out. And then the big fish come in there and they buy up the stuff out of the rubble. It's like you said, with this onshoring vibe, what is to stop these people from, bringing back factories, owning all the robots in them, and using that to just pad their already enormous levels of wealth. And we don't hear any solutions about that. We don't hear anything about a real industrial policy. We don't hear about um, public ownership of whatever automation is coming our way, which we know it is. There should be talk and debate about having shared prosperity through shared ownership of all of these jobs that are going to eventually be automated. But that's lost in this entire conversation. We could be directly investing in manufacturing things that have double benefits for us. Green energy uh, that can employ people in manufacturing jobs, that can make us more independent, that can help us solve climate change. We could directly fund that, but we never do. We could unionize the service industry. That was our consolation prize for all of this financialization and this going along with what the free traders and the elites and the economists said the first time around. We lost our base. We got left with the service economy. We could be talking about unionizing that. We could be talking about the PRO Act and card check for workers, right? Getting a union by signing a card so you don't have to rely on a secret election, and the really fragile labor law that we have. Are any of these things part of the stated goal of bringing back manufacturing or setting up an economy that truly lifts working class people up? No, of course not. We just get this like crazy tariff policy where 1 minute the economy is melting down, and the next minute billionaires are standing in the White House bragging about how they bought everything up after the chaos. And to me, I think we need to have a handle on the larger game plan of the players involved here, because these billionaires and the politicians that they have on their payroll, I am convinced, do not believe in a future for any of us. They have their weird little creepy buddies like Curtis Yarvin. You heard of this guy?
No.
Oh man, JJ Nash, give Curtis Yarvin a Google. So he started off as a blogger, right? But he's kind of a thought leader on the right, and they're not even hiding what they want, right? Because this guy actively is calling for an American monarchy. He says that like democracy is over, it's done with, it's not serving us. What we need is a benevolent monarchy that's kind of run by CEOs. This is the kind of future that these people have in store for us. They want little fiefdoms. Imagine every metropolitan area that's just governed by the worst boss that you've ever known. Surveillance capitalism, right? Social scores, cities that are run like Amazon warehouses, constant tracking. The infrastructure is already there for that. We see recently, like this week, police department debut a RoboCop dog from Boston Dynamics, the company that's always making these robots, putting them on the internet, and all of the comments are like, "Hey, we have to like pour water on these things right now. Have you not seen any of the robot movies?" They're debuting that. Like, what are those protests? What are those robots going to be used for? There's a thriving bunker industry. These billionaires, are not planning to participate in the future. They're planning on hiding from it. And, this rant is going on really long. I should don a tinfoil hat, but I'm just going to keep going because when you stack up all of what's happening and you try to make sense of it, given the path that we're kind of on for climate change right now too, because keep in mind, what's happening. We are rolling back regulations on forever chemicals. We're firing up coal plants. We are bringing back child labor. That is, not because they don't know what's coming. It's because they do know what's coming, and they're just cashing out at what seems to me like a pretty bleak future, instead of like addressing it or talking about any of the things that would get us all through it. It's robot dogs and deregulation and coal plants and child labor. It's just crazy. And to me, that's where this tariff policy fits. That's where this tariff policy fits, because the practical outcome of it is to wipe out the small fish and transfer more power to the big players. So I think that's a good end of the rant. That end game, too long didn't read. They're going to break the economy. They're going to loot what's left. They're going to rebuild things for themselves, exactly like Donald Trump putting out that ridiculous video of building a casino on Gaza. I mean, that's kind of representative of what's going on here. These people want to break it, buy it, and sell it back to you with them in control. And I think it's important to keep the big picture in mind. Rant over.
Yeah, I've seen so many people who are like chief investment officers, people who work at big hedge funds, talking about how Trump's goal with these tariffs, and I think they're right, that his goal with these tariffs has been to change the global order, who our main trading partners are, where power lies. Sure, I think that's all good and accurate, but I do think it misses the perspective of the working class people in our countries and abroad, because a 10% tariff, even on a country like Vietnam, has the potential to crash their economy. This is a country where the average income annually is $4,000. The idea that they can buy as much stuff from us as we buy from them is just nonsense. And so the kind of world order that I think is going to come out of these moves is one of the haves and have-nots that's more extreme than what we see now. And I think that when people talk about, okay, a future of AI manufacturing, computers and robots doing most of the work, we'll have UBI. We'll have a universal basic income. We will take the money made off of the labor of these robots and computers, and we will redistribute it among the people so then they can go on to buy the stuff that's been made. Who does that serve? who has decision-making power in that economy? It's still the people who own the factories, who own the robots, who own the computers. They would be making simply because they have the capital to open these factories and purchase them. They would make the decisions to direct all of the production in the United States, and the rest of us would be in an underclass where we have a fixed income. We don't have a say over what's made and how it's made and what we can buy and how our productive capacity is directed as a society. It's a really like authoritarian economic structure still. And so while maybe it would solve the problem of like we can ensure people's basic needs are met with this income, it falls short of like creating a desirable world to live in. And I think it's good to have that optimistic inclination of like maybe there's solutions. It's like there are solutions, but like you said, John, without that like shared ownership, without some kind of meaningful decision making power among the people in our economy, we're still going to see this overclass of rulers and capitalists and this underclass of people who have just enough to get by and maybe purchase a little bit of tchotchkes that are made in the factory so people can furnish their yachts, you know?
An exclusively tchotchke based economy. We deserve so much more than this. And that's where, yeah, I think those are all great points. And I think that's where, we need to steer the conversation towards power. Power over, we should have power over our government. We're supposed to be of, by, and for the people. Who believes that? I mean, there's even a Princeton study from 10 years ago that said we have little to no control over our government right now. But we shouldn't just have control over our government. We should have control over our workplace, right? Everybody is obsessed with freedom, and it's a great thing to be obsessed with. But somehow we just, check that at the door of wherever you work. You just submit yourself for at least 8 hours a day to whatever shitty boss that you probably call into the John and Jess podcast to talk about. But that's the kind of conversation we deserve. What do we, the people living in America, have power and control and a say over? It should be our government. It should be the places that we work. But we don't really have that represented in politics right now.
Yeah. Like in 2019, I gave a TEDx talk at Brown where I went to grad school about the idea of a democratic economy. And it's really interesting because, like, my parents grew up working class, and they kind of knew, like, my politics were getting activated. I wanted to work for the Bernie Sanders campaign. I was really upset about how the recession had been handled now that I was becoming, like, aware of it. And I really spoke about the dynamics of exploitation and, like, how we don't have decision-making power in our economy. And some photographer at the event snapped a picture of my father in the audience, and he's kind of, like, sitting like this, and his eyes look, like, a little bit watery. And I didn't see this photo till, like, months later, but I remember, like, afterwards, I asked them, "What did you think of my very, revolutionary TED Talk?" Where literally at the end, I was like, either this is gonna get fixed or it's gonna get fixed through a revolution. And I like stuck my fist up and I walked off. And there were like some people that were like, that was so cool. And there were some people that were like, how the fuck did you get a speaking slot at this event in an Ivy League institution? But I really mostly cared about like what working people thought of it because I figured that's who the audience would be online. And my dad was like, I was really sitting there considering how we kind of are wage slaves. And like, my mom was like, I was sitting there thinking, like, have I been a slave my whole life? And so it's interesting because I think this impulse among a lot of people in America today to say, oh no, we can't rely on slave labor in China, but fail to consider the lack of freedom of decision we have in our economy in America. It's more convenient to believe that someone else is a slave somewhere that makes our lives better than realize we lack freedom of choice in America. We literally have such shitty options for like food, furniture, cars. Like the quality of goods is just going down. So people at the top can charge more for it, accumulate more wealth, and improve their quality of life at the expense of ours. And I think this week has really slapped that in a bunch of people's faces.
I think you're right. And I think there is an appetite for the real thing, which you're kind of hitting on through that story right there. But the only reason that like Trump and JD Vance and their buddies are in power is because they're the only ones who are they're lying about it right now, right? The Trump really like was the missing puzzle piece to the right wing project for a long time because these guys can't tell you what they're going to do actually, because if they did that, you would be like, oh, they just want to make like 1,000 people fantastically rich and powerful and let them run the entire world and fuck everybody else. That's what it would be like if they talked honestly about what they want to do. But Donald Trump was able to lie enough and come in here and bring the popular support for the most elite agenda. And the only reason why he was able to succeed is because there's not an opposition party delivering the real thing. But I think this movement is really the MAGA movement, Donald Trump. It's bound to fail. The only reason why it is succeeding right now is because it's the only game in town and it's not facing real opposition. But they are speaking out of both sides of their mouths. You know, they want to be populist in the streets, but it's billionaires in the sheets, baby. That's who they're actually with. And you know, the opposition party, the Democrats right now, the only thing they have to offer is just like nice tech bros and rainbow capitalism and just, you know, vague platitudes. But as soon as we start to force a real working class agenda, which is what you see Bernie and AOC doing out there in their rallies right now, that is drawing all of the people in. It's obviously where the energy is. As soon as we first force that working class agenda, national health care, good wages, strong social security, public services, a real conversation about how do we make the AI and the robots work for us? Or, you know, as the Secretary of Education said recently, how do we make the A1 work for us? Really, you know, as soon as we make this about real things for the working class that is currently only going for Donald Trump, when you offer the real thing, that's going to crumble. But we have to get to a place where one of the major parties, it's not going to be the Republicans, is offering a genuine working class agenda. Because until then, we're just going to have people thirsting after, um, you know, whatever version of that is on offer. And currently, the only one on offer is these fake people who, you know, tell you they're going to lift you up and then brag about how their billionaire friends profit off of the craziness that they make in the stock market. Right. But it's why we need, like now more than ever, we need a Labor Party to emerge from this, whether it's primaries of the Democrats, whether it's running as independents. I feel like we're at that moment.
Yeah, and simultaneously, there's a fight going on that has next to nothing to do with us, regular working people. And it's among corporatists and oligarchs. It feels like Donald Trump doing this is, in a way, sticking it to the corporatists, the people that have a bunch of money in the stock market, that rely on the 401ks, that are some of these big corporations that are hurt by these tariffs. And they're really opening up like a huge avenue with this move, crashing the economy, to have oligarchs buy up some of those companies that get themselves in trouble. Because as you said in the last episode, they have more money than God. They can wait these periods of financial downturn out and they can capitalize on those moments. And the working class is losing out either way, really. But that power struggle is one that's different from ours, and they're trying to make it about us because working people are touched either way. But don't be fooled. Working class people are never the number one consideration in any decision these super rich people make, whether they want to defend the corporatist order or the oligarchic order. They talk about us because they, want to have public approval. They don't want the pitchforks to come out and what have you. But doesn't have much to do with us. But I think it is important to remember that, like, production coming to the United States as a result of this is an unlikely thing that will happen. Um, I wanna talk about Wisconsin. There was a Wall Street Journal article on Friday about Husco, and they make engines and parts for automakers. They have about $500 million in revenue, so not a small company. They've got 3 factories in the US, but they also have plants in China, India, and Europe, which mostly produce for the regions in the United States. Um, the new tariffs would likely lead Husco to shift some production out of their US factories. The new tariffs mean it will no longer be cost efficient to import components to make products for export. So they've got components that are made in their factories in India and China and Europe, and they bring them to the United States sometimes, for assembly. And it's not going to be worth it anymore to import it because of these tariffs. And so I think that's really key is that the supply chain is already global. So this idea that tariffs will make any meaningful change in the short term is super unlikely. I really think in the short term they just give a fuck about the stock market and using this as some kind of opportunity to make some money with the fluctuations, but in the long term really shifting the power of production or the ownership of production to like oligarchs instead of corporatists. But Husco isn't the only company that's hurting. Stellantis also hurting as well. One of the Chrysler auto manufacturers, right? Did they buy GM or Chrysler?
Chrysler, yeah.
Chrysler.
So yeah, you got a couple of other ones involved in there. Fiat, some of the other European brands. But yeah, Stellantis is now a clearinghouse formerly known as Chrysler. What's the news there? There's something with Stellantis, right?
Yeah, it looks like they laid off 900 people
Oops.
and they're pausing production in plants in Canada and Mexico. And so it looks like these tariffs are kind of having the opposite intended effect in the case of Stellantis.
Yeah, great way to underscore the interconnected nature of the supply chain, right? Because you can have something made in America with global imported parts. Like that's also on the label. Um, like I said, I have a lot of I get it. I get it when people are like, hey, don't just side with the free traders and the business elites and all these people who think tariffs are the worst thing because, those people were very wrong in the past and economists are frequently wrong. But once you let that genie out of the bottle, the globalization genie has gotten out of there. It's permeated every single part of our life and it has changed the ways in which you respond to it. Formerly, it might have been effective to have blanket tariffs on there, but that's different now that these people have really set up the global economy on their own terms. So if we were really concerned about a policy that is going to reshore manufacturing and lift up the working class, it would have a lot more tenets that we're just not hearing these people who are championing this. They would be talking about more things like unions, like public ownership, but we never hear it.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that the immigrants were supposed to come for these jobs, but now it sounds like tariffs are taking them. And I get that there's a deep history there. Here in Iowa, there was a huge problem when there was a major strike, and the strike was, broken by them bringing in migrant labor scabs. And
I'd
so
agree.
people sort of remember this, and it became the foundation of this narrative. Now, do I think the main problem is these companies being greedy and exploiting workers' labor and wanting to pay as little as possible? And they should be punished, maybe criminally, for what they're doing by, paying people less than the federal minimum wage and hiring workers from overseas. Yeah, like that's the main problem here. But of course, it was a convincing narrative when you had so many people angry that the scabs were brought in from Mexico. And they directly saw them come in and break their strike when they were fighting for better wages and benefits. So, like, we can't pretend that that anger is made up. And I think that that's a mistake the Democratic Party has made, is pretending that that anger came from nowhere and it's a made up story because some of the most powerful narratives are rooted in a grain of truth. And that's, I think, what happened in that case. But
It's a
uh,
really good way to put it. And, it's been said on the internet before. I think it's true, though. It's the only minority that's wrecking this country is the billionaire ownership class, right? They are the ones that are taking your jobs. They are the ones that are committing crime that goes unpunished. I mean, our president's a felon, you know, and all of his friends, I'm sure, have
Mhm.
committed the kind of crimes that you can get away with on Wall Street. But don't try that if you're not on Wall Street and you don't have money and power, because they will crack down on you. And immigration is a place these days that is having a lot of crackdowns. You want to get into that, Jessica?
Yeah, let's get into some of this. So this particular situation's interesting because Donald Trump personally was reported to have asked the Supreme Court to rule in his favor in this case, which we know he appointed a lot of these justices. We know that they come from these grooming nonprofits where they're paid like thousands of dollars to attend dinners at the Federalist Society. They're in the revolving door of like the Federalist or the Heritage Foundation, whatever. We get that that's all corruption and they get gifts and shit like that. But there's something a little bit extra about a personal phone call to ask them to rule in favor. Was it a phone call? I don't know what the communication was. I don't wanna say phone call because it might have not specifically been that, but we know that he asked them to rule in his favor. They overturned a lower court that did put a holding on deporting people with alleged gang ties, um, to El Salvador. We heard a lot about this. One particular person was Venezuelan. That case made the news, but now we know that about 90% of these folks had no criminal record.
Yeah, 90% no criminal record. Why does this matter? You may have heard it covered in the news. It's a little thing called due process. Due process. But what is
Why
that?
are
I
we
mean,
doing process, John?
we're doing process because that's what the government has to do before it fucks up your life. You know, due process is a set of rules that the government has to abide by before it does things like take away your freedom. You have a right to get a lawyer. You have a right to state your case. You have a right to for the a jury of your peers to hear what is going on, to figure out if the government has their ducks in a row. And it turns out when you have people, gangster criminals running your government, a lot of times they don't have their ducks in a row. And whenever we just throw that principle out, a lot of bad things happen. It means that the government can just take away your freedom without any explanation. It means they can disappear people with no criminal records into an El Salvadorian prison for good, like exactly what is happening right now. It means whoever has power at the moment, and however they get that power, maybe it's because of lying to a bunch of people about how they're going to bring back the good old days, right? However they get power, when due process gets eliminated, it means who has the power gets to say what is happening. And that means precedent is set in all kinds of bad ways. The phrase, first they came for X, there's a reason why that exists. And it is for moments like this where an administration is just recklessly throwing out the process by which we find out whether somebody did a bad thing or not. And it turns out a lot of the people being disappeared by our government right now for things like exercising their First Amendment speech or for coming into this country, working, playing by the rules, paying taxes, and not committing crimes. Um, those are the kind of people where they're like, "Hey, you look bad. We're going to throw you out of here," and that's what happens. But it's why all of this is very important, because we're quickly moving toward, in a lot of ways, we're already there, and we have been long before Donald Trump has been on the scene. But we're deepening our two-tiered justice system. You can do cocaine on Wall Street all that you want without any repercussions. But if you touch that in the street, a lot of bad things can happen to you. You can break the law at the highest levels. You can talk about war crimes on an encrypted group chat meant to evade the public record, and you can do those war crimes. You can get face no accountability, get promotions, increase your status, right? But if you litter on the street, if you pick up a credit card and swipe it for $100 that you found on the street, you're gonna face the long arm of the law, right? This is the system that we are moving toward. And to really deepen that and make that the norm rather than the exception, it starts by throwing out due process in these cases. Rights are not something that you can just be like, some people have them and some people don't. Citizens have them and some others don't, because as soon as you go down that slope, you get into the first they come for X situation, right? Right now it's immigrants, then it's going to be naturalized citizens, then it's going to be actual citizens, then it's going to be labor organizers, and then it's going to be anybody who speaks out against this administration. And we've already seen such an advancement of that, that we should stop, I think is my take.
Right.
Sounds
Yeah.
good.
Mahmoud Khalil had legal status, was married to an American, had a green card. And so because he was designated to be, defending some kind of terrorist group, there was an excuse made there, and that's why they said they targeted him. And that anyone who is, supporting a terrorist group in the United States, you gotta go. Ridiculous. It's the kind of, like, scare tactics that they used. I'm gonna say this in my 9/11 shirt after 9/11. Um
Whoa.
yeah. Okay, so that's now turned into, maybe you've seen these headlines, John, about, Miss Rachel.
I did see that. Yeah, actually, I meant to text my buddy about that because he admitted a crush on Miss Rachel, which I feel like is a widely shared opinion in America among millennial dads, but I digress.
Interesting. That sounds like something Freud would find fascinating. Okay,
I
so
think so.
Miss Rachel has now been said to be spreading pro-Hamas and anti-Semitic views among children, which is sort of a
A track.
play on this culture war thing of like children or parents' rights and protect the children in schools. But this is a private citizen on her personal YouTube channel being attacked for her separate political views. And we're already in that stage of like, your position on Palestine is really the thing that they say, if you're supportive of Palestine and critical of Israel, that is now serving as potentially a premise for you to lose your rights to due process under the rule of law in America. That's crazy. We're already seeing it seep into other factors of like, it's not about who entered the United States illegally or not. It's about, are you on their side politically or not, which is against everything the First Amendment says, which is something they supposedly love.
Yeah, yeah. Let's just keep going here, just because it's
Yeah.
important information to know. Because another thing that's in the news that is relevant to this is the IRS in the deal that it struck to share sensitive tax information about undocumented immigrants with ICE. So this is a huge policy shift. Your tax records, your financial information is confidential for a reason. It's so that people can keep paying taxes without fear of that being weaponized against them in some way. Yet this policy is directly reversing that and putting this population of immigrants, whatever their status is, um, into question. Which, by the way, just for the record, it might not be publicly known, but or widely known, but undocumented immigrants pay a ton of taxes in the United States of America. So much, in fact, that in 40 states, undocumented immigrants paid a higher effective tax rate than the top 1%. Okay, this is according to a study from Boundless. We can link it in show notes. It goes on to list a couple other facts about the taxes that undocumented immigrants pay. Um, as a group, they paid $96.7 billion in taxes in 2022. 59 billion to federal taxes, 37 billion to state and local taxes. The average tax contribution for an individual undocumented person was $8,889 per person. Now that the IRS has struck a deal with ICE to share this information, not only does it jeopardize an already vulnerable population, but it jeopardizes the whole principle of people coming here, working and paying taxes, because that's what this population of people has been doing. Contrary to the narrative that they're out there doing crime, they're actually out there doing the jobs that nobody else wants to do and have a lower rate of crime than the native born population, which is all to say about the big picture here is that this is just scapegoating. Every enemy that is put forward by the right is a scapegoat to make us distracted from the real crime by the real minority that is a threat, which is billionaires, as we have mentioned in the past.
Yeah, and I think finally we're seeing like pushback in the streets, but I will say it is in kind of like a parade, not a protest kind of way. Yes, streets were shut down because there were like thousands of people, but I guess that makes them see who is against what they are doing, and that definitely means something. What's interesting about the hands-off protests over the past weekend is it was primarily, like, white libs and, like, older, like, more middle-aged, and that's really interesting, like, elder millennial, Gen X boomers with some funny signs, but I think that it's fascinating to me that we saw most people of color sit this one out. And I think that's for a few reasons, for how we've seen people of color be treated much more harshly by the police, and then subsequently afterwards in like arraignments and court hearings for how they behave at a protest, whereas a white protester behaves the same way and doesn't have the same legal repercussions. It's sort of this racist application of the law. That's part of it, but I think another part of it is, you know, their vote share determines that they did not ask for this, and this is not a fight that they feel they've brought on. And I think those are really fair points, and it's just an interesting part of our politics in America, um, that it's just like a respected and understood thing that right now we have to fight this separately.
Yeah, it is getting to that point. I do. There is a difference between theory and practice, and I tend to fall much more on the, like win at any cost, have the odd bedfellows. Any progress is good. But we are in a moment where we really need to see these kinds of protests, the hands-off protests. We need to see them materialize into more um, concrete things than we've seen in the past when people hit the streets. I think there's a potential for it. Um, in Wheeling, West Virginia, the hands-off protest was over 350 people. This is a town of 25,000 folks in Appalachia, right? It is not your coastal elite territory. So 350 people in the streets against this administration is nothing to sneeze at. I think what we need right now more than anything is a mass movement to counter Donald Trump and the fake version of working class populism that he's offering. I think the appetite is out there, but it remains to be seen where that energy goes. You have the reaction to the Cory Booker speech on the one hand. You have the largest rallies that Bernie Sanders has ever held in his life on the other hand, and it remains to be seen what direction this is going to go in. But my own personal hope here is that we are really at a Tea Party moment for the Democrats. I am going to talk about this on the show. I already have today, but I'm going to keep doing it because that is what we really deserve. Because what the core of the Democrats are doing right now, in addition to nothing, is ceding power to a very rapidly moving fascist movement. I mean, these people are asserting control. They're breaking things. They're using that as a way to assert control. And the Democrats are, just reaching back for politics that is dead and gone, except they don't realize that yet. So that is not the core leadership that we can have in power. And it is going to take some movement like the Tea Party to take it in a different direction. And I've already said, I think the direction it needs to go is to force discussion of a true working class agenda, of national health care, of beefy Social Security that's not on its last legs, of, uh, you know, public investment in jobs and factories and manufacturing that's not just a ham-handed tariff policy, of a $17 minimum wage, of, ownership and control, not only of our government, but of the workplace, kicking big money out of politics. These are the things that need to be the foundation of an opposition movement, that just currently are not with the core leadership of this party, and they need to be removed if we're going to confront this movement. And I think people showing, 350 people in Wheeling, West Virginia, that's the makings of something that could really change the nature of the opposition party. We have to keep talking about it. We have to keep the focus, the eye on the ball. We have to run people who are going to brawl for the working class, not climb for their only for their own political career. The time for that is over. These people running around in suits who've wanted to be president, Gavin Newsom, I'm looking at you, since they were 5 years old. That is not the leadership that we need right now. And, it's not like we're talking about a big lift here, but it's not too big. You could imagine a movement coming out of both these protests and the leadership that we're seeing from people like Bernie and AOC that elects maybe 20 people. Okay, that's how the Freedom Caucus started, right? The Freedom Caucus was like 20 people who were insane and evil. But with just 20 people, they were able to downgrade the credit rating of the United States. I'm not saying that's what we should do, but I am saying that 20 people can do something as unimaginable as that. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about building a working class bloc, bus drivers, waitresses, working class people representing the Democratic Party, and voting on all of the working class agenda that we talked about, and turning all of this energy that we're seeing spill out into the streets into a real agenda that people are clearly hungry for and are currently relying on the lies of Donald Trump to quench that thirst. If that's the direction that this goes in, then it's good. But we got to take it there. And I don't think it happens naturally.
Yeah. We have some petty ones to celebrate, though, in the meantime, while we're
Oh, yeah.
building this movement. And really, I feel like a movement is just a bunch of people deciding to do the right thing and speak truth to power. It doesn't have to be something like you all get together and plan it together. Like Rachel Cohen, the attorney that left her major firm because they were capitulating to Trump when he asked them to, and her going out and testifying to the Judiciary Committee like she did this week and speak to the press about what's going on. That has a massive impact, and that's just, like, one person in a corporate law firm deciding to do the right thing. And so don't underestimate, like, it sounds big, but it's a big thing that's comprised of a bunch of little small actions and choices, and sometimes those choices seem small in the context, but they're actually huge. Anyway, it's like A Bug's Life or whatever. Let's talk about Elon Musk and this petty win.
Bug's Life, another movie I have not seen. Is it a movie?
Yeah, I saw that one in theaters. It was loud as hell. I did not like that. But a
Please
great
bully.
movie.
Please bully me, JJ Nation, on seeing both Star Wars and Bug's Life.
All right, please. Bug's Life is a classic. All right, all right. So Elon Musk was gaming, right? Doing a
Yes.
stream, and this comes after the big controversy that he like isn't a real gamer and he like hires people to game for him, but he was trying to prove his worth to a bunch of teenagers as one does after that kind of scandal, and he was playing Path of Exile 2. Now, commenters kept posting repeatedly, "You have no real friends and will die alone. Die, die, die." And then
Based.
he was frantically trying to hide them. And then, while he's trying to hide them, he lost his hardcore permadeath character, whatever that fucking means.
Yeah,
And
what is that?
but the reason was because of Starlink lag.
Yes.
Now,
Yes. It's like being in a desert and having the rain fall down.
yeah, yeah. It's nice that He sees it, right? It's in his face. He wants to be cool and liked so badly. And now there's even like drama within the White House. We reported on Politico's piece where they said insiders are saying Elon won't be around much longer. I think a lot of this has to do with it's a similar fight to the H-1B visa shit, where Elon is on the side of like the corporatist technical elite sometimes because he has to be, because that's where his money is, that's where his businesses are. And now he's beefing with Peter Navarro, which in many ways has been the brains behind Trump's massive tariff policy, because Elon doesn't think there should be tariffs on Europe. Why? He sells Teslas in Europe. That's a market for him. But also, more than that, it's a little bit of white supremacy, I think. He wants there to be a trading bloc of like wealthy white nations, because I believe that to be his worldview, coming from apartheid South Africa and having a father who profits off of that and sort of being raised in that ideology. I think that's a part of it too. But Peter Navarro doesn't like that, right? These people don't appreciate the relationship that the United States and Europe has had. They believe in a very nationalist perspective, and so it seems that things are falling apart a little bit, which is interesting.
You can take the boy out of South Africa, but you can't take the apartheid out of the boy. You know what I mean? Sometimes that's how it goes. My petty win is even the billionaires don't think they should exist. And Exhibit A in this is a Disney heiress who gave an interview to, who did she give an interview? People magazine. And she said, people who can't live on $999 million are kind of sociopaths. And I think she's right. Petty win. Thank you, billionaire heiress. And, she is right, because the thing that I wish people would scream from the rooftops is how you make money in the stock market, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that is a pile of money represented by stocks just multiplies itself without you, the owner of the stocks, doing anything. And the mechanism by which that happens is a bunch of people who work at the companies represented by the stock that you own go to work, produce the value, and then you, the stock owner, get the value that somebody else worked for. There are more factors than that, obviously. Speculation, rogue presidents, a cabal of billionaires that has hijacked your economy. But that's the fundamental way that this works. And when you have a pile of $1 billion, $1 billion, 1% of 1 billion is $10 million. What was the rise in the stock market recently, Jessica? Did you say 12%?
Yeah.
Okay. A rise of 1% when you own a pile of $1 billion is 10 million. Okay. Imagine 12%. That's more money than one person can physically spend. And we have this concentration of wealth where multiple people have hundreds of billions of dollars. They are sitting on top of this wealth black hole that will multiply whether they sleep all day, straight up die, get owned in a video game, make a good business decision accidentally. No matter what they do, it doesn't matter. That is going to increase just by the force of its own, which is why billionaires should not exist. It's not good for them. They can't spend the money. It's not good for all of us, because that concentration of money that just multiplies itself is literally a direct threat to every principle that this country was founded on. Okay. It is the most direct threat to all of us controlling the society in which we live. So the Disney era says billionaires shouldn't exist. And I think that they're right.
Yeah, the stock market is a crazy invention. It's kind of lost its original and true purpose of like public financing of companies. Now it's kind of a way to gamble on the projected value of those companies. Um, the tariff announcement from Donald Trump caused a loss of 10 trillion in stock market value.
Is that it?
10 trillion was the loss. And then of course we had that tweet, that fake tweet saying, "Oh, he's paused the tariffs." Which then we saw a bump, a major bump. I've heard people project it to be as much as $4 trillion, that bump being worth. But then, of course, people realized it was a fake announcement. We saw the stock market dip again. But now that it's officially been, put in place, this 90-day pause, uh, just 7 stocks have added over 1.5 trillion since then. So anyone who bought at this dip right before this announcement, they made a ton of money, especially the people that could afford to put like millions and millions of dollars into this. But we really wanted to bring in an expert on the stock market, which I am not, but Barry Ritholtz is. I, follow his blog pretty closely. He has amplified my reporting on the California minimum wage. I reported that it actually didn't cause job losses when a lot of conservatives were putting out bad data saying it did, and he like amplified this out to his blog of mostly investor minded people, which is huge. So friend of the show, Barry Ritholtz. Let's see what he has to say about all of this. I asked him to start us off just, for those who aren't investor minded, what is the the connection between Trump's announcement with tariffs and the stock market? What would you say to like the average person why that announcement impacted the market so much? And here's what he had to say. Barry Ritholtz, thanks so much for chatting with me. It's been a while since we've sat down together. You just came out with a new book, How Not to Invest, which I imagine is something people are thinking about a lot right now. Trump announced across the board tariffs on April 2nd, many more than we were expecting. And we've seen the stock market respond tremendously. Today, I've seen the S&P is already down about 5%. Because Trump's gone back and forth on these tariffs, right? And so I think maybe some people were holding out, expecting he would call them off. It doesn't look like that now. And I think a lot of people are wondering who aren't investment minded. Maybe they don't manage their own investments. And they don't quite understand why this tariff policy is affecting the US stock market so much. What would you say to those people?
So think about what the stock market actually is. The stock market is essentially a future cash flow discounting model. And in English, let me translate that. Hey, what's the value of these companies going to be in a year? Well, here's what we expect their revenue to be, and here's what we expect their profit to be. And then we come up with some multiple, we're enthusiastic about the economic background, the market background. So we put a slightly higher times 15 or times 20 to the profits. And that's how you end up with the valuation of the market. And so you're making these collective judgments about where prices will be, where profits will be, and what the crowd psychology will be a year in advance. And while Trump has, for his entire adult life, been enamored with tariffs. He calls himself Tariff Man. He ran on tariffs. And I think Wall Street supported him because Wall Street loves the idea of, hey, a business-friendly environment, an FTC that's not going to be doing antitrust enforcement, lower taxes, less regulation. Where do we sign up for that, says Wall Street. And then what actually happened is, after he got elected, what turned around was, all right, tariffs on again, off again, on again, off again. This is just a negotiating tactic. He's not really serious. We can live with a little bit of confusion, and it's all negotiating tactics. And then Liberation Day comes, and we've all been liberated from a big part of our 401ks. Suddenly, it's not a negotiating tactic. It's not a strategy. It's no, we're going to go back to the way things were in the 1800s because those were the glory days of America. And we want to make America wealthy again. And everyone is kind of, if your viewers are confused by the methodology and the purposes of this, so is everybody else. It doesn't make any rational sense. How is Vietnam ever going to have a zero trade deficit with the United States? If everybody in Vietnam took every penny they earned and bought goods from America, they're still not going to close a deficit. We're a giant country, the biggest economy in the world with 20% of global GDP. None of these countries could really make a dent. You think of Vietnam, it's like, what is Mississippi's trade deficit with Europe? What is Utah's trade deficit with Asia? It just doesn't make any sense. And I can sum it up simply by saying we put tariffs on penguins in Antarctica. That kind of gives you an insight to the degree of sophistication and thoughtfulness that apparently went into this chat GPT formula, which has been demonstrated where this formula came from. It's haphazard, it's opaque. We could talk about how the goals have changed repeatedly, but overall, if you're confused, hey, that just means you're paying attention. Everybody is confused. None of this makes any rational sense. It's what Trump has always wanted to do, regardless of his lack of understanding of global trade, economics, alliances, etc.
Yeah, it's 3 Ford F-150s for every one Vietnamese person, right, Barry? That's what we need to see happen.
It's right. So when you think about this, it's if you're not confused, then you're deluding yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, let's actually talk about the goals changing. Initially, tariffs were talked about by Trump in a way of we're bringing manufacturing home to US soil. Now, I've seen this chart go around a lot, but it's the share of US jobs that are manufacturing jobs since 1947. And you see that it's been a steady decline since the 50s. Now, a lot of people point to NAFTA or China joining the World Trade Organization as the triggers to manufacturing jobs leaving the United States. The chart seems to tell a story that it's been a trend over time. Do you think there's any hope that these tariffs bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States? And do you think that's a narrative they're going to cling on to?
So let's talk about narrative shopping first, the explanation for this, and then we'll talk about what the U.S. economy is. So Ben Hunt over at Epsilon Theory does this fascinating, deep analytical structure where he's looking at various substacks and blogs and news outlets and social media, and they scrape off keywords. They're looking for linguistic markers, semantic signatures about different subjects. And they create a baseline to identify how these phrases are used by the president, by his then candidate Trump, throughout the election process. And what we saw before he won the election, a lot of talk about protecting domestic industry. Hey, you would say that if you were interested in winning votes in Michigan and Wisconsin and Ohio. A lot of talk about pressuring neighbors to secure borders. Hey, I guess if you're focusing on New Mexico and Arizona and Florida, arguably, and Texas, you say that. And then there's some conversation about reshoring manufacturing, which is a long process. But then after the election, we start to hear more about replacing the income tax and lowering other tariffs and then getting other countries to pay for their defense share. And it very much seems like, and I'll share this chart, Ben's chart with you. It very much seems like this is a policy in search of a rationalization, in search of an explanation. And it just looks like these are endless trial balloons. Let's figure out what sticks, and then we'll go with that. So that's part A, and that's pretty obvious that we don't really know what this is about. We could delve into the details of how America's economic success is distributed to its population, but it's hard to argue we're not the suckers. We're not, America as a country aren't the losers. It's the strongest economy in the world. It's the greatest amount of wealth creation from World War II to April 2nd that the world has ever seen. The U.S. was the envy of the world. Now, we have lots of problems. A lot of that wealth has found its way to the top, fill in the blank, 10%, 1%, 0.01%. We have an ongoing issue with a lack of healthcare, with medical costs, with education and college costs. So I'm not pretending the United States doesn't have a ton of problems, but this seems sort of bizarre because this isn't going to address any of those problems. All right, maybe you can secure the borders in Texas. Maybe you can um, try and protect existing U.S. manufacturing. But let's talk about the U.S. economy for a minute. For the past, I don't know, let's call it 50 years, the U.S. economy has shifted. First, we were doing complex. First, we were doing simple manufacturing and, of course, agriculture. Then we started doing more significant, more complicated manufacturing. And as we've moved up market, well, we've taken the simplest manufacturing and offshored it because why are we paying people $20 an hour to make, basic clothes? And we're not going to make hosiery or underwear here anymore. We're not going to do basic furniture assembly here. Like the easiest, lowest cost stuff has been outsourced. Now, capitalism being capitalism always goes too far. It's just the nature of it. If there aren't guardrails, well, that's how you get child labor and slavery without some guide rail to say, hey, I understand that's efficient and profitable, but it's not ethical and it's not healthy, and we need to cut that out. So you need some sort of guardrails. And the pandemic very much revealed, wait, we can't make masks. We can't make basic masks. We can't make simple protective clothing for doctors. From a national security perspective, we need to have some degree of our own in-house ability to manufacture this. So some reshoring has come up. It certainly makes sense that you shouldn't be totally dependent on China for everything. And so you end up with a set of circumstances that, all right, we've gone too far looking for the lowest common producer. And there are ways around that. There are ways to incentivize companies to make certain things in the United States. We saw that in the Semiconductor Act. We saw that in the infrastructure bill. We've seen it in all of the incentives for EVs and electric vehicles and either low emission or zero emission vehicles. So most countries have an industrial policy. The US hasn't recently. And so if you want more of this, well, then you need to create a certain level of incentives for the companies to not simply go to the cheapest labor source, but we need to build certain things here. Keep in mind, the U.S. was an agrarian economy. It became a manufacturing economy. Then it became a services economy. And now we've moved to a digital information tech economy. Tariffs kind of are ignoring that 100-year transition. We don't make shoes and clothes here anymore because it just doesn't make sense. We could put our labor force and factories and everything else to better use by making more complicated, more profitable, more sophisticated products with a high level of intellectual property. The tariffs kind of gloss over that. And by the way, all the trade deals we've made over the past 30, 40 years have very particularly been adjusted to recognize American intellectual property and American prowess. There's a separate issue that China cheats on those deals, and that's very specific to China. There's no doubt they're a bad player, and we need to do something about it. But this should really be managed with a scalpel, not a chainsaw. And that seems to be why the market is reacting the way it's reacting.
What's your suspicion now as to what Trump's goal is?
I don't think anyone has a real handle on his motivations and thought process. He has been a fan of tariffs his whole life. I don't understand why, but I didn't grow up in a wealthy family. I didn't inherit a lot of money. I haven't run a lot of businesses that have been forced to declare bankruptcy. So this is kind of like it's really hard for me to imagine his thought process other than he seems to be all over the place. And, not only are the goals of the tariffs so ill defined, but, think about how the Federal Reserve informs the market of what it's going to do. Before rates started to get hiked, there were warnings, there were recognitions. We have to deal with inflation. We have to deal with this. We have to deal with that. And eventually, the Fed does what they do, kind of eases their way into what they're doing, so as to not surprise and shock and disrupt the market. And the same thing with the cuts. We're following the data. We're looking at these things. We expect that later this year we'll start cutting rates, and eventually that happens. The idea is to whatever changes the market's going to make, it adjusts whatever thought process people have. You want to make those adjustments. You want to make those announcements in a way that's transparent, clear. The goals are understood. The methodology is understood. Here's what we want to do. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's when we're going to do it. Everybody's on the same page. That really seems to be missing from President Trump's tariff plan. We heard about Liberation Day. We didn't really know what that means. We didn't really like what. It just seems that this whole thing has been very clumsy and chaotic, opaque, and not a surprise. The markets are reacting the way they are. When you shock the markets, they have to go back to, here's our best estimates of future profits and what the state of the economy is going to be. You have now pulled the rug out from that. Everything is going to be more expensive. Consumers are going to have less discretionary money to spend on things. We're lowering our estimates of consumer spending, employment, wage gains. If companies are paying more for input costs, they're going to have that much less money to pay for gains. We're going to drop GDP, depending on the estimate you look at, 50, 75, 100, 125 basis points. And we're going to lower expectations for the market by 20%. And so we're in the process of working through that right now.
And does this change anything in your book? Does your book have any sort of advice for a scenario where the US president tariffs literally everyone in the world? Did you consider this, Barry?
No, I did not consider a 19th century self-inflicted error. That wasn't there. But I did talk about how nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. And I brought in examples. I brought in examples from film and from music and from movies and from real estate and from the world of hedge funds. And, we really don't understand what's happening here and now. And we certainly don't know what the future is going to be like. The good news is, hey, if you're not retiring for 10, 20 years, this will just be a distant bad memory and you'll be fine on the other side. If you're retiring in 2025, 2026, this is a challenge because suddenly you thought you had this much money and now you have this much money. And so my heart goes out for people who were hoping to either buy a house this year or send their kids to college. Like suddenly 401ks and 529s are worth 10, 15, 20% less. That's real money. If you have a long enough time horizon, you'll be fine. If you're retiring over the next 18, 24, 36 months, this is going to sting. It just feels so self-inflicted and avoidable. My best case scenario is, hey, there's going to be a bunch of side deals cut and he'll be speaking to the UK and he'll speak to Japan and Korea and this will all work out. That's one part probability and 4 parts wishful thinking. They keep coming out and saying, no, we're not cutting deals. These are the tariffs. So we'll find out soon enough if this was just, if they were serious or if this is just a temporary tactical approach to thinking about how to realign the global order when it comes to alliances, trade, and the whole global economy. The market has initially given this a big thumbs down. We're waiting to hear. By the way, we had a big speech recently from him 2 weeks ago. This wasn't really laid out in this way. Again, after that speech, people kind of said, "Okay, we have an idea what he's doing," and investors and economists and everybody else said, based on this speech to both houses of Congress and to the American public, we think we see where this is going. It's pretty clear that a lot was left out of that speech, and that's why you are getting such a shocking reaction from markets. I think that there is an increased probability. In the beginning of the year, I had recession risk at about 10%. Now it's 50-50. We could be in a recession, today for all we know. I'm the Atlanta GDP now. Some of the nowcasting already has us down 2, 3, 4%, depending on which one you look in GDP. Not that that's the definition of recession, but you never want to see an economic contraction suddenly come out of the blue. We're starting to see all the soft data, the surveys, consumer sentiment, CFO hiring plans, company CapEx plans. Those sentiment data have all flipped negative. But, consumer sentiment has been negative for the past 5 years and people kept spending. We're now starting to see the soft data roll into hard data. And what I mean by that is look at some of the companies that have pre-announced either bad earnings or lowered guidance or both. The two big surprises is Delta, biggest airline in the United States, said they're seeing decreased bookings in the future, which makes sense. Hey, I don't know if I'm going to get a bonus this year. I don't know if I'm going to get a raise. I don't know if I'm going to have a job. Honey, maybe now's not the time to book that vacation to Disneyland. Let's hold off on that. So you're starting to see those things bleed in. And then if you're running a company and you have to build a plant or figure out how many people you're going to hire, or is now the time to do a big software update? Hey, we don't know what's going to happen with our revenue. We don't know what's going to happen with our taxes, with the tariffs. Like everybody kind of freezes in place. And so you immediately see a decrease in spending, and that will take a few months to show up. So we're starting to see that. FedEx is another company that pre-announced and said consumers are shipping less packages. All right, so if people are booking less discretionary travel, if consumers are buying fewer goods, if companies are reducing their hiring plans and reducing their spending plans, that's not necessarily a recession. Hey, maybe we go from 3% growth to 1% growth, still expanding, just much slower. We're a little less wealthy, a little less good of an economy, not a recession. It depends on how long that goes for, how deep that goes, and that'll let us know what the world is going to be like. I think it's going to take a few weeks or months to see how this plays out, but it's obvious that, Trump inherited a very robust economy that had suffered through some high inflation that had come down. His election very much was a combination of a vote on Biden and Harris personally and unhappiness with increased prices, especially in the grocery store. This doesn't help any of those things. And, I keep hearing people say this isn't what we voted for. I kind of think it is what you voted for, because he's been talking about these things for years, decades. And, he seems to be serious about it. So we'll get a little bit of a bounce in the market today. We'll see if it's sustainable. The worst thing that can happen is the market bounces 1% or 2%, then rolls over and sells off. Technically, that's a really negative thing. It means there's just no appetite for buying and there's more downside. You can't go straight down or straight up. There's got to be some relief, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
I always feel like I understand the world a little bit better after we chat, Barry. Barry Ritholtz. Ritholtz.com is where you can find a lot of his recent work. The Sunday reading list is always fire. I always check up on that, Barry. And How Not to Invest, your book that just came out. You're a great resource for anyone trying to understand the economy and financial world a little bit better. So really appreciate you coming on and breaking this down.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I hope we didn't get too technical and in the weeds with a lot of this. It's complex, it's confusing. The good news is we'll get through it.
All right, so that was beloved Barry. Thank you so much for listening to this 1 hour and over 20 minutes episode. We really appreciate you hanging out with us. We want to ask if anyone has a tariff story about how small businesses or a company you or one of your buddies works at, how they've been impacted. Let us know right to the show.
Call into the show. Let us know that tariff madness. And thanks for hanging, JJ Nash. Until the next time, stay locked in.